Good evening, everyone, and welcome to day 3 of Conc-live, a Triumph event by Monster.com. I'm Vidya, your host for the evening. As you all know, Monster is a leading online career and recruitment resource that provides the right profiles to employers and the right jobs to job seekers. And as you already know, Monster caters to all industry verticals, experience levels, as well as geographies. At Monster, we're committed to building a more diverse and inclusive environment for all. And keeping in line with this philosophy, Triumph has been launched in collaboration with a few of the best companies known for diversity and inclusion at the workplace. And we would like to take a moment to thank our main sponsors for the event, Microsoft, Chubb, and BNY Mellon. And also a very quick reminder, this is day 3, and we want to remind you of what Triumph is all about. Triumph is a 360-degree event hosted on a virtual platform for candidates to be inspired, to compete, and get their dream job. So to quickly start off, what we have in store for you today is the first one is a talk on making D&I an inclusive organizational agenda. Following this, we have a panel discussion on culture fit and culture add. And to close today's event, we have a very interesting session on LGBTQ and what it means at the workplace. What are the rights and what are the laws that we have? So to begin the day, we have the first program, and the first program is a talk on co-creating a mosaic, making D&I or diversity and inclusion and an organizational agenda. And we have with us Nikita Panchal, who's going to share her views on this topic. And before we move ahead, I'd like to introduce Nikita. Nikita Panchal is the Global Head of Talent Management and Development, ODN Diversity and Inclusion at ACG World. Nikita considers herself as an agent of transformation, and it thrills her to constantly push the edge of consciousness in herself and in others. Nikita is an executive coach and a global leader with HR experience of more than 18 years. We're also happy to share that Nikita has won various awards like Business World. From Business World, she has won the award HR Learning and Development Excellence. And this was in the year 2021. Nikita has also won the Great Managers Award in 2020 by the Economic Times, and also the People First HR Excellence Award in 2017. Nikita, we're happy to invite you, and we're happy to have you on the event today. Welcome to you, and over to you, Nikita.
Hello, good evening.
You can get started. Welcome to today's event.
Vidya, are we good to go?
Yes, we are.
Great. Let me just share my screen. Just give me a moment. Good evening and welcome to this 30 minutes of dialogue on Mosaic, making D&I an inclusive organization agenda. So today, I'm going to talk on how do we really make D&I an important aspect of an organization's way of living. And all those who would have seen a mosaic, you would know that mosaic is made up of different pieces, and each piece finds its way to represent itself in the entire creation. And perhaps that is also how we see organization. And to make it truly inclusive, it's about finding a place for each piece to be able to see in itself in its complete potential, to be able to exhibit the beauty that it has to offer. And let me just begin by sharing, what according to you would be a good way to look at a DNI strategy. So when organizations look at articulating and defining their DNI strategies, what do they need to look at and how do they put together a mosaic which works for them? So, like you see on the slide, a good DNI strategy begins with the root being strong and the first piece of it being the organization objective. And how does that serve through the DNI process? And the first point of conversation is around having this diagnosis, having these dialogues with the critical opinion leaders, with the key decision makers to understand what is the business objective that DNI is going to serve. And that forms the foundation of any good DNI program. The second thing that one needs to look at is the areas around where to look at for these options. This is the where to play option, which is to focus on what kind of DNI policy will really work for the organization and what can be customized and done ground up as against really replicating for what is working for somebody else. Really looking at revisiting and re-articulating some of the practices and some of the processes to see whether they are truly DNI representative. And do they really speak and live up to the expectation of how a diverse workforce would need? The second aspect to focus on around this place is to create a culture which is, which feels and where every person believes that this is where I can be myself, where I feel safe, where I can exhibit my complete potential. And that's where the how to win options come in, which is to really create more experiences for people where they are able to educate themselves, where they're able to build more awareness around diversity, break some of those stereotypes that they have inherited over a period of time, reduce some of their own mental biases, and also reward themselves for adopting and propagating new inclusive behaviors. And does the organization even create space along with their day-to-day working to be able to exhibit some of these behaviors and nurture them? The last but not the least, and in fact the most important one, is how do we configure? And this is all about really institutionalizing these practices to ensure that it doesn't become one-off day that you exhibit it or one-off moment that you live it, but it actually gets into the bloodstream of the organization, and it really becomes the way of working and the way of living for an organization, and hence get embodied in the organization culture, becomes a part of leadership language, becomes a part of a leadership style. Now, let me start talking about diversity and the basics of diversity. And most of the time when we speak about diversity, we focus on one of the dimensions, or sometimes organizations tend to focus on maybe 2 or 3 dimensions. And if you speak to anybody in a good organization, they would speak about gender or diversity of education or culture or nationality. And it really makes it sound fairly siloed. But if you look at categories of diversity and if you look at the institutions of diversity, they are multifold, ranging from age, education, religion, ethnicity, abilities, nationality, and sexualities. And if you look at the institution setup, they are more around family, religion, profession, industry, caste, and education. And it is the combination of each of these dimensions which eventually become the agenda for what an organization would like to focus on. And hence, it makes it a multi-dimensional topic, it makes it more richer when you look at all of this together as again slicing it down to one aspect at a time. Sorry about that. It just went off the slideshow mode. So when most organizations begin the diversity program or begin the diversity conversation, the immediate tendency is to do things which look good, which feel good, and which focus more on the normative consideration, which is, you begin the diversity agenda because it's a good to do thing. You talk about it because it makes the organization experience more people centric. You do it because that's the ethics of doing business. But the progressive step, or I would say the next maturity for the DNI program, is to look at it from a business consideration, which is to really pause and reflect and see what is the real business problem that we're solving for. You know, what is the core business objective that we will meet if we were to really achieve this agenda? What aspect of our business deliverables will become more closer if we were to really fulfill some of these diversity parameters and linking it to that. Now, let me just take an example of, which is the most generic one and the most popular one and in this moment in time, because I'm assuring that there would be a lot of people who would be wanting to lose weight. And if you typically look at anybody who is attempting to lose weight, you would really look at a simple thing like a weight loss in a more holistic way, where you'll either be focusing on the physical aspects of weight or losing the weight, or you'll be focusing on the mental aspects in terms of what is your mind control, or what's your ability to take up stress, or what's your self-esteem. And you will also be looking at aspects around what's your diet and what kind of food do you take, or what kind of fiber intake do you take, and then also the energy level, which is in terms of what's your metabolism like, and how does your genetics support it. Do you have any kind of a disease or any kind of secondary health challenge which is adding or aggravating to it? And we generally look at a simple thing like a weight loss from a multi-dimensional approach. And if that's a small problem that one individual deals with, and you look at it from a multi-dimensional approach, imagine from an organization lens where you are solving so many problems in a day, where every function or every role holder is faced with a unique situation or a unique problem in each moment in time. And if that problem were to be solved in a holistic way, imagine the amount of input data or amount of diverse information that the person would need to have access to in order to solve that particular problem in the most rightful manner. And is it possible for one individual to have all cognitive information, which means that the person would need to have, in this case, knowledge of health, physical body, knowledge of energy body, knowledge of mental body, and knowledge of dietetics. And many a times, you generally consult all four different experts to solve into one situation. And that is what diversity is all about from an organization setup. And let me just talk about this aspect when it comes to an organization living. And when you try to solve similar problems in an organization setup, you focus towards getting a lot of these inputs from a lot of cognitive aspects of different functions or different people from different education, different walks of life, coming together and sharing that too much knowledge to help you solve a problem. Now, one may say that it's easy to access knowledge, it's easy to access information in this era because there's a lot of knowledge available at a click of a button. But it's not only about having knowledge, having access to knowledge, but able to organize it, able to analyze it, able to really look at the suitability of it and know of it in the right moment in time to be able to solve for a problem. And hence, cognitive diversity becomes equally important from an organization standpoint when you're really solving problem at every instance of organizational living. So what does this do to us? While there is too much of knowledge and while there is too much of information, there's also an opportunity here. The opportunity is how do we use this diversity of knowledge to be able to skillfully solve the problem? And how do we have people who come from different walks of life who carry this diverse knowledge within them? And typically, the next set of diversity that I'd like to talk about is identity diversity. And because cognitive diversity actually brings in knowledge from your education, knowledge from your experience, knowledge from what kind of projects you've handled in the past, knowledge from what kind of assignments have you succeeded in, failed in, and all of that knowledge becomes a part of your cognitive diversity. But there's a unique aspect when you look at it from an identity diversity standpoint, which is going a little below the iceberg, where aspects like ethnicity, religion, family, what kind of culture you come from, what kind of class you come from, what kind of values you live by, and this are nothing but lived experiences. So you can say that there are people who might have done very similar education, coming from very similar schools, coming from very similar backgrounds, but may have a very different identity diversity because their lived experiences are very unique, and each individual would have their own lived experiences, and that is what which adds to the richness of the entire process. Now imagine a group of individuals with good level of identity diversity working together, and imagine the richness of that conversation, because you're not only having the diversity of education and exposure, but you're adding an extra layer of the diversity of their lived experience, which comes together to look at one thing in multifold way. Now, the question is that would you apply this everywhere? Would you apply cognitive diversity and identity diversity in all aspects of an organizational life? And what would your moment of choice be to begin in an organization? Now, when we looked at it internally, where we first applied this, we looked at which are those functions where this would make a critical impact, where this would be really necessary to begin with. So cognitive diversity, especially in a function, say like an NPD, which is cognitive, at the same time, the work is very non-routine. The work is more towards creative innovation, looking at having new ways of solving and innovating, looking at the design thinking approach. That's where cognitive diversity works the best, and it's a must-have. On the other polarity, where you look at manual and routine, which is diametrically opposite to cognitive and non-routine. Examples like your operating lines, your assembly lines, where work is as usual, where SOPs need to be followed more stringently, where there is very little room for deviation, where there's little room for recreation of a practice. That is where you might need to look at cognitive diversity and identity diversity at the lowest end of the spectrum. And these are spaces where it may really not be required. But when you look at aspects which are maybe cognitive, but also routine, things which are more cyclical, things which are more, where there is an SOP and you might have to follow through that practice on a consistent basis. Those are areas where they are good to have, where there is a room for re-engineering the process, or where there's a room for looking at the same process in a more creative, different way. And hence, some amount of cognitive diversity might help in enhancing and further improvising that process. And diametrically opposite to that is the manual and non-routine, which is where you see a lot of opportunities at the shop floor, where processes get looked from a technology lens, where you say that, hey, what can I really automate? What can I optimize? Or is there another way to do this? And you would typically experience this in the second layer of the organization from the bottom, where you would have those shift supervisors or people who are in the managerial capacity coming up and saying that, can we do these things differently? And those are the moments when you would want to really look at a manual, non-routine process to be redesigned. And that's where cognitive diversity plays an important role. One of the most important steps for diversity is also the intake of people. And many a times we've been asked that, how do you really improve your diversity numbers? And the answer is simple. It depends on how much of diversity focus that you have at the entry stage of the funnel, and what are the measures the organization is taking to ensure that the funnel is open enough to infuse a lot of talent which are different, and we do not stereotype and hire only one kind. Now, what do organizations need to do differently in order to create that practice, in order to create that process which really welcomes people from different walks of life, people who are very different than one another, and more importantly, people who are very different than the hiring manager? Just thought I'll share some practices around that. So when you look at this picture, what comes to your mind? I'll just pause for a second. And what comes to my mind when I look at this picture, and you would see some similar pictures in many organizations' website, career pages, spaces where they are advertising for jobs or putting across their, job descriptions and moments where they want to hire fresh talent. And typically, these pictures do communicate a message about, whether we have a group of engineers who are going to get hired, or we are promoting people from a younger generation, or we are looking at people who are open to work in field. And it's important to just pause and reflect, what is the communication that I'm giving out when I am looking at, communicating through pictures, through visual aids at my hiring stage, and what kind of branding am I creating around this? So some of the branding checklist is identify candidate touch points, look at your career page, look at your website, look at the LinkedIn content, as much as possible, send across more inclusive communication, because that is something that you really want to talk about and stand for as an external communication partner on this topic. And the first interface that an organization that has with an outside candidate is the job description. And many a times that also becomes a medium for the candidates to evaluate whether the organization is truly inclusive or not, because we think that it's only going to communicate about the role, but essentially it doesn't stop there. And how creatively are we able to craft a language which actually talks about aspects around inclusion? Does the job description really communicate that this position is for somebody who is open to looking at several diversities? And what could organizations do differently in order to ensure that whatever they put out in the social platform to a specific candidate, that does carry the ethos of inclusion? And some of the aspects that we could focus around is the language of it, for sure, neutralizing the gender, neutralizing the age, community, working around those stereotypes, using simple, understandable, concise language, which is more inclusive for every person and makes it easy for every individual to understand. And also really mentioning the new age ways of communication. For example, mentioning job conditions and not really, mentioning content around how the job, how the job needs to be handled by a particular role, looking at mentioning unnecessary qualification or overemphasizing on a particular aspect which focuses around any person's ability. And also creating mechanisms which actually helps you neutralize some of these filters. Like I remember connecting with one individual recently where they had invented, it was a startup, and they had invented an app which actually neutralizes all the JDs before they move into the market, or they also help neutralize all the resume inflow before they come to the corporates, which means that you would not know whether the person who has applied to you is of what gender. They neutralize the language. They would mask the entire resume by, not giving any information which could create bias in the mind of the recruiter. And I think those are the new age practices which need to be deployed for a person to be able to really have the openness and not have the first rejection point based on some of the inputs that I mentioned. The second and the most important piece is also the selection for diversity. And, many a times, once the individual goes through the job description phase, it's at the selection stage where people look at very specific criteria. And, one of the things that we've been also dialoguing internally is that, are these criteria even relevant? Are they even contextual to the present reality of where the organization is? Or are they followed through a tradition which we have normed some time back? And a good case in point is to look at now with so much of global inclusion and we really entering a boundaryless world. Should these selection criteria even be dialed down? In terms of looking at removing some of the unwarranted filters that we create or some of the biases that we have in terms of who can apply for what kind of job or who is skilled enough to do what kind of task or what kind of qualification is really necessary to do what kind of jobs. And this is a time when one needs to really pause and re-engineer some of these criteria, right in conversation along with the managers. So that also opens up the minds of the manager, the mind of the HR fraternity, and also the mind of the candidates who can look at more possibilities than one from the kind of background that they come from. So some of the call to action is really screening the criteria, revisiting them. I spoke about it, really agreeing with the managers on what are the real non-negotiable ones. What would you really want to focus on and zeroing down on that. And really eliminating criteria which are conflicting, which are counterproductive, which are at polarities to each other, and having conversations with your partners to understand whether these criteria will really work when you put them out in the market. So, we've been talking on how do we really reduce the criteria, but there's large part of work which happens in not only removing criteria out of a process, but also around reducing some of these biases that we hold as individuals, as humans. And how there are practices which help you clear up your mindset, which help you open up each individual's mind towards eliminating biases. But there are also tools that are available, and we live in a world of tools. So, some things that you need to do is also have an adoption at both ends. Work at the individual level to reduce biases and open mindset, and also have quick adoption to some of these new age tools, which is really having the pre-assessment test, which actually looks at the feasibility, looking at resume masking, looking at tools which actually enable you to have blind hiring. We were looking at an instance where if we were to really hire a person where we didn't know, where the manager didn't know whether the individual was from a particular gender or belonged to a particular country or belonged to a particular institute of a particular order, would the individual still be hired if he or she or met all the prerequisites of what the job requirements demanded. And I think the intent is to really weed off what is the non-essential and zero down to really what is that key ingredient that will make the person successful in the job. And how do we as an organization explore and evaluate in getting some of these new age practices adopted and integrated as a part of the hiring process. And most importantly, bringing in the human process. So how do we have conversations with managers when we see these biases coming in? How do we talk about the halo and the horn effect? How do we talk about people when they look out for their clones in the person that they want to hire? And do we have those moments of truth? Do we have those conversations where, we speak to the manager after the interviews get over, after the selection processes get over, to talk about what did we see more of? What did we see less of? How could we eliminate some of this in the time to come? And these conversations become equally important because, at any point of time, a manager would hire multiple people in its entire life cycle. And one conversation can really change or remove some of those biases, which can have a multiplier effect in the way the team is being constructed. And also looking at it from a process perspective, which is to look at how do I really improvise my processes? How do I have a better standardization of some of these practices? How do I have more than one person to hire an individual? How do we create a talent council or a panel or maybe a BEI methodology, which can enable reducing structurally some of these biases which can get generated through an individual or a singular person hiring at a particular level and above. So, while the entire process of talent acquisition begins right from the JD to looking at selection, to looking at how the interview is conducted, what kind of communication goes back to the person after the interview is over, to how much do we communicate when we go through the moment of rejection and we do not select the person, and are we being even inclusive enough to share the feedback and tell the individual what the person needs to further improvise on to be better fit to a role next time. But it doesn't end there. It actually begins from that process, because the immediate next step to the journey is the onboarding support, which is to look at how do we really integrate the individual to the organization values, give a glimpse of the culture, talk about what's really essential for the person to know to be able to succeed in the organization. How do we create the integration roadmap which helps the individual to understand the finer nuances of the organization, which sometimes goes beyond the boundaries of the role, goes beyond the boundaries of the manager, goes beyond the boundaries of their own function, and just opens up the space to knowing the organization in its entirety. And this becomes even more important in the COVID context, because we are viewing the world through the small screen that we see, and our culture assessment is based on the people that we meet and interact on the screen. And hence, really having that inclusive onboarding process, which enables any new incumbent to really understand the ethos, understand the culture, understand the values, becomes a very important prerequisite and an imperative to make the person feel truly inclusive into the culture and into the organization. So most diversity programs move around inclusion, around making the person feel included, making the person have a sense of partnership, being there. And I've seen that eventually they progress around belongingness. That is when people actually start feeling for the organization. There is a sense of partnership, there's a sense of co-creation, there's a sense of contribution that comes in as an outcome of that, which eventually progresses towards engagement, which is towards really deepening the roots and having a sense of fulfillment, understanding what is the purpose that I'm achieving in doing all that I am doing, and also able to create a higher meaning in whatever I contribute and in whichever ways I as an individual show up into the organization. And most importantly, the last stage and the most mature stage is when it really sinks into what are the diversity outcomes, when it starts impacting and start influencing and starts partnering with organizational objectives, with what will succeed and what will help organizations succeed in the longer run. And that is when the D&I objectives become sustainable, where you don't talk business and diversity as two separate elements, but you talk business and diversity as two very important inclusive elements to make an organization succeed. So this is what I'd like to pause and conclude with, which is to say that diversity, when you look at, and I'm sure many of you, when you look at going into parties and when you get invited to parties or any corporate event or any social event, diversity is about being really invited to a party where you have the membership, where you've been called upon. It's just like a hiring process where you get introduced and you get onboarded. Inclusion is about really being asked to dance in that party, where you've been told that, hey, you're part of it, and would you like to join the fun? Would you like to get engaged? Would you like to be part of this? Would you like to co-create this? Because you and your presence and all that you bring in is really important to make this party come alive. And belongingness is when you really understand the lyrics, when you're able to tune into the song, when you're able to groove into the music. And that is the ethos that we want to create in an organization, where every person finds its own space in the mosaic, where every individual is able to see through the mosaic and be able to contribute in its own way. With that, I'd like to take a pause and check in if there are any questions, inquiries.
Thank you, Nikita, for sharing, very useful and relevant information, which I think any HR professional or anyone with an organization can kind of pick up and implement their day-to-day work. And there's one point you had mentioned, and I got a question around that. Nikita, do you think organizations today take care of diversity in education? We have so many other areas, but we say that I want people only from premium institutes, or I want people from institute A, B, or C. What about all of those intelligent people out there who may not belong to any specific, these kind of universities? What do you think?
It's an interesting question because Vidya, we've been deliberating on this, that it's only at the hiring stage where we say we want people from the premium institute. We never say that when we are promoting people internally, or we never use those criteria when we're transferring people, or when we're giving a larger role, or when we're doing any kind of role mobility. And it's an interesting bias to look at, that why is that criteria then so important at the entry stage? Because when you are within the organization, then you look at performance, you look at excellence, you look at passion, you look at contribution, you look at how much you can stretch, how much you can take up, what's your ability to work on with diverse projects and diverse stakeholders, and all those criteria become hence more relevant. And perhaps it is also about the amount of risk taking that the hiring manager wants to do at that point in time. And we've had those moments where we've spoken to the hiring manager that what is at stake, or what is that unique aspect that that individual will bring in with that background and that education. And what would that uniqueness be looked upon if we were to hire somebody from not from the same institute or from the same kind of pedigree, So it's more about looking at what will that education fulfill as against needing that education as a norm. So if I know that I need a person who's from Germany and who's an engineer only from Germany, and I know that that education is going to bring in some level of sophistication and technology, or some level of inciting and a specific knowledge which we do not generally have in other countries or other backgrounds, okay, then you can think about it differently. But it is just because you have a bias or you have a belief that this education can de-risk me from knowing something. That's when you might want to just call that out. So it's about also having those dialogues and understanding what is that education going to serve, and what are the other ways of de-risking and evaluating other criteria along with it.
Right, really true. So I really sincerely hope that organizations do look at this form of diversity as well going forward. And with that, we'll conclude this chat, Nikita. And we're really happy to have had you in this event today. And we do hope to have more such conversations with you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye. Right. So the next event we have for today is a conversation, a panel discussion on culture fit versus culture add, and what is the case for diverse hiring. And leading this panel discussion, we have Ruchi Ahluwalia, who's the HR head for Quess Corp Limited. And Ruchi will lead this entire panel discussion. And Ruchi, over to you.
Thank you, Vidya, and thank you, Nikita, for the wonderful and engaging session. Good evening, all of you, all the viewers, the e-viewers out there. And moving on to our agenda of diversity and inclusion, I would like to host this session, which is in the form of a panel discussion with three eminent panelists. But before we get to the panel discussion, and take this diversity inclusion agenda forward, I'd like to just ponder with you all, some of the nuances of diversity and inclusion. Nikita did touch upon few, but I thought I'll bring in, an organization perspective and also an employee perspective from a real life case that I was a part of. So this is in one of the organizations that I had worked. And we had a business case where we had to hire people who are freshers, who are, from different education background. The reason for that was very clear, that we felt that to, start a new thing, it was better to start the learning from scratch rather than, hiring people who are experienced unlearning, helping them unlearn and then making them learn a new, technology. So we went all out. It was business case. It was top driven. So there was no issues on hiring these people, and we did that. And we were all happy that hey, we've got a diverse set of people. Including that, we had about 40% of women in that pool, and so it was like diversity from all angles, whether it was education, like Vidya just asked that question. So we had all the streams. It was cultural diversity, it was regional diversity. We had a team of nationalities were also different. The team which was leading this group. So it was diversity at its best. And of course languages, we can't ignore that. So after hiring, we realized that everything is done, but then the real challenge of assimilation started. How to make sure that this group is synced in well. It's very well woven in our cultural fabric and is able to deliver what we want them to deliver. And that was again a huge challenge. The first barrier around that was language. Nobody thought that, right? In these groups itself, there were different languages that were spoken. Then we had our expat population who were speaking different, their own language, the version of English in their own accent. So that's when, we had to bring in one language, come what may, whether you can speak a particular language, which was English in our case, or not, doesn't matter, but, everybody speaks the same language so that there's no language barrier. Then came the gender, differences, because we had, like I said, a lot of women and a lot of guys, and both the people, because they were freshers, didn't ever work together. So the boys were not used to, working with the girls, and the girls were not used to working with the boys. So we, whenever we used to get into an engagement session or any meeting, you'd have two lines, both the teams, the boys and the girls sitting separately. And many such things. So this was creating another kind of an issue for us when it came to teamwork, because at the ground floor they all had to work together. So we had to do a lot of interventions to break that ice and bring these two teams and the sub teams amongst them together. As basic as even food challenges, because they are from different regions. So the food choices would have been very, very different, or for them to be really happy and engaged in a company, they would expect a certain kind of food. So that got ironed out, and slowly we brought to a level where we were very seamless, and we thought that everything is done. We started to celebrate not Women's Day but more inclusion days, so to say, and that's when another challenge came in, and which was growth. Each one of the people, whether it was a woman or a male employee, they were looking at growth, irrespective of what background they came from, but they had aspirations. So then, of course, we worked on that, and with constant efforts around that, we had rotations, we had international assignments, we had promotions within. We had higher education programs and things like that. So the essence of the whole thing, what I'm trying to communicate is that the buck doesn't stop at hiring, or the buck doesn't stop at only talking about diversity. It is diversity, inclusion, and growth. Like Nikita mentioned, to really make it sustainable, all these three parameters have to be really looked upon with the equal amount of seriousness. And without any further ado, to ponder upon these issues and to really hear our panelists' stories from their organization, their personal experiences, I'd really like to welcome here our three eminent panelists from the HR world. who are leading HR practices in their respective organization. I would first like to welcome Devyani Singh, who's the director, APAC HRS at Eaton. She manages HR operations across the Asia Pacific for about 20,000 employees. She has been with Eaton for the last 12 years, doing different roles. But before that, she has served the Indian Army in the Army Ordnance Corps for 11 years. So she comes with a great diverse background. Welcome, Devyani. And Devyani is also a dear friend and an ex-colleague of mine. Moving next, we have Suraj Chettri. Suraj is the Regional Director HR with Airbus India and South Asia. He has about 28 years of experience in a variety of industries ranging from aerospace, automotive, engineering, sales and marketing, manufacturing. He's worked with companies like Robert Bosch, General Motors, Textron and Airbus. With Airbus, he's been there for since 2011. So welcome, Suraj.
Thank you very much, Ruchi.
Then we have Lakshmi Rajgopal, who heads the diversity and inclusion agenda at Fidelity India. She's also the HR lead for India operations at the Chennai site. She has a diverse experience of 20 years in HR, consulting and market research. And she's worked with organizations such as BNY Mellon, American Express, and the Gallup. So welcome to the panel discussion, Lakshmi.
Thank you.
And it couldn't have been diverse. I am taking this call from Bangalore. Devyani is in Pune, Lakshmi is in Chennai, and Suraj is in Bangalore. So it couldn't have been more diverse than this regionally. So welcome once again. And I have a set of questions for all three of you, which will help us get to the different nuances of diversity, inclusion, and growth. My first question is to you, Lakshmi. There's a lot of buzz about diversity, not only now, I mean, it's been for years together, we've been talking about it. What do you think in your mind is the real case of diversity? Does it really offer a competitive advantage to a company? Because frankly speaking, it's a lot of, things to manage around it. It's a culture change and things like that. But why do you think diversity is very, very important to an organization?
Thank you, Ruchi. That's a great question. Thanks to Monster for the opportunity and a very warm good evening if you're in this part of the world, or good day. If you're in different time zones, I hope everybody is feeling safe out there and your family and friends are safe too. So before I actually answer that question directly, Ruchi, so I would like to see diversity and inclusion as a journey. We all have come a long way in this journey, right? Right from the days when it was like a to-do, you had that checklist, then to a programmatic approach. And now we are in a state where we are leading towards an integrated, leader-led, inclusive mindset. D&I has become a business imperative, right? So there are numerous studies that show that D&I has significant impact on hardcore business outcomes. So we can keep naming data, statistics upon statistics. So there's a lot of study out there, right from customer engagement, right up to profitability, productivity, etc. Right. So we must also keep in mind that the customer demographics are changing, and they're changing very rapidly, right? So we need to have diverse employees who are able to create those superlative customer experience actually. So let's take an example of financial services sector, because I do represent that over here at least. So research has predicted that there will be a significant increase in women and millennial Gen Z customers in the future who will be managing the finances. Now, just imagine this scenario. If you don't have a diverse employee base that mirrors the customer base, how on earth can we service the expectations of diverse customers, right? So that's why diversity and inclusion is a business imperative. But there are two aspects for us to remember here, right? So one is organizations understand and realize this. There is no doubt. But we should transcend beyond the normal traditional dimensions, right? Like gender, language, community, geography. And we have to keep in mind the invisible dimensions as well, like cognitive diversity and what impact this creates, right? Like the thinking styles, learning styles, etc. That's one aspect I would like to leave the audience with. The second one, of course, is the organization should probably move away from creating awareness, having programmatic large events. Large events are good, but then just not stop there. They should have clear action orientation. They should have D&I strategy at the leadership level, right? So only when awareness leads to action, we will be able to see D&I really moving the needle on some of what we set out to do.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for your inputs. My next question is to Suraj. Suraj, don't mind if by mistake I call you Suraj. As I said, we have a CEO who is Suraj. So there might be for me, I've programmed myself to call him Suraj. So if by chance that happens, please pardon me.
Happy to be mistaken. I'm fine.
Thank you. We discussed, Suraj, over a couple of days back, you are a minority in your own family. You have two daughters, mother-in-law and wife. And then we spoke about, diversity. What is your view on that? So what does diversity really mean to you?
Ruchi, if I have the permission to speak freely, I can tell you diversity in itself means nothing to me. It's one of those very loosely used words all across the world today. And for reasons known to many and unknown to many. And in one shape, size, or form, we as diversity and HR leaders also have a part to play in this whole game of diversity being used very loosely. Now what happens is, call it focus or vision, is absolutely important. And of course, a caution to the audience, don't go running after hearing us speak in this panel and use the word diversity like a magic wand as the cure for all diseases. Mark my words, if you do not have a vision, if you don't have a strategy to go about, a target focus, dedicated outcomes and metrics not in terms of getting numbers for diversity, metrics in terms of improvement of business, you would have wished that you never embarked on this journey, because it kind of will open a Pandora's box if you can't handle it properly. But inclusion, like Nikita said, is the key word that makes diversity work. Culture, acceptability, understanding, appreciation, working with the biases, and of course, to create that sense of belongingness, or that I am a part and I have a contribution that I have to make in the product or the services or whatever goods that the organization manufactures or delivers. Let me use a farming analogy, and it's a Japanese word called nimawashi. And it basically means that even before the seed is planted, one needs to prepare the ground well. So you take care of every aspect, you ensure you take proper care, support is provided, nurturing is happening, that the right soil is ready. And then when you plant the seed, then you have a yield of 1,000 seeds. What I'm trying to say is diversity in itself is not going to change anything. Diversity in itself will just add numbers. But what you need to do is make the organization ready like the soil, so that when diverse people come in, it makes all the difference. And you can yield those results that you listen to in surveys after surveys of X, Y, and Z percentages of improvement on productivity, on employee satisfaction, etc., etc. Sometimes I feel like a thorn among the roses in diversity conferences like this, but that itself makes me diverse. by default. So I'm happy with that. In a group of women, a man like me here is diversity. So the meaning, you also need to understand that the meaning of diversity would change from situation to situation and circumstance to circumstance. Say, for example, in a startup of all the youngsters, a senior employee could be the diverse person that you're looking at. So that for you would be diversity. So do not get, stereotype that diversity in gender is only going to be women. Diversity, in other aspects is only going to be young millennials and things like that and all. Once you have this entire 9 yards, then bringing in the diverse talent will translate into growth, into development, into success in business and great products, satisfying customers. Innovation and creativity will come out, and then you can say that the best team are the most diverse teams in all forms of diversity, in terms of gender, nationality, age, culture, physical abilities, and other orientations to life. Now, the last thing that I want to say is diversity is not about outward appearances of people that is visible. So diversity is not about the outward appearance that is visible, like color, race, gender, but it's about what is not invisible, what is not visible. And that is how you are wired between your two ears. That's what diversity is all about. And that's the focus that we should have when we're talking about diversity. Back to you, Ruchi.
Thank you, Suraj. And I can't agree more with you. On your soil example. For me, that's inclusion. So instead of focusing on diversity, focus on the inclusion, and then the seeds could be, diversity of all kinds. So thank you for your views, Suraj. Moving on, we have a 180-degree contrast with Devyani. So you, Suraj, have a minority amongst the women. And Devyani, from her army background, I think had a totally different experience. So Devyani, my question to you is, in your 11 years, those fabulous years with the armed forces, what did you really do to make yourself included?
Thank you, Ruchi. Firstly, thanks for calling the Army experience a great, I would say it's a great honor to have the opportunity to serve that organization. And thanks for helping me walk memory lane, right? So what I did to feel included, in very simple words, I would say I just did my job, right? So I was hired as an officer. I always treated myself as an officer. I don't think in the army we ever have a word called a male officer or a female officer or a woman officer, right? So I was an officer first, always and every time. So that's the way I felt. I was included in the team and my men respected me. However, with a pinch of salt, I'll also say, you can't deny the fact that you're a woman, right? I didn't want to acknowledge my gender, but people around me were observing me. So I had to do everything even better than my male colleagues. I had to prove myself. So in the army, I would have moved around 4-5 times. Every 2 years, we go to a new team, to a new location. And at that time, almost 25 years ago, women were still a novelty in the army, except as doctors and nurses, right? The men had not seen women in the field. And they didn't know how to handle this new species. But we had to act as if we are just officers, right? However, to prove ourselves, we had to perform even better than our male colleagues. It's like always you are on in that fishing bowl where people are watching you, right? But I think the team was excellent. The men and your colleagues, as they get to know you and they know you, you are not any less, than your other male colleagues. The respect comes and the inclusion comes. So having said all of that in simple words, just do your job. The gender doesn't matter. So that's how, in very simple words, I felt included.
Thank you for your views. And while you are still unmuted, I'd pose this question to you, Devyani. I know from personal experience, Eaton does a lot of work around diversity and inclusion as an organization. But I'd like to ask you, how has it really helped your company? What have you done around making this diverse and inclusive workplace?
Right. So firstly, like as you shared, I was hired in Eaton, I don't know, almost 13 years ago. I mean, I'll be completing end of this year, 13 years with Eaton. So it's a long journey. At that time, I mean, we didn't have a I&D office also at Eaton, but Eaton is a more than 100-year-old organization, and it's a part of our value system, right? Like as Suraj mentioned, the ground was ready for a long time for people like us from very different backgrounds to come and create new careers at Eaton, right? So then how I&D helps, right? Like, so in Eaton, I mean, we don't call it D and I, we call it I and D, inclusion and diversity. Because we say diversity is the mix, but inclusion it is what makes that mix successful. So inclusion is always first to us. And how it's helped the organization, I can just take a few examples which are very real to me and to my experience. Like I joined Eaton as the HR leader of a greenfield organization. We were setting up a new plant in Pune to make transmissions. And I don't know how many of you on the call are from the automotive industry. So transmissions in India is a vertically integrated model. So like all the Tatas, the Mahindras, I mean, most of them make their own transmission. So Eaton was making a big gamble in making transmissions, which we would go and sell to all these big OEMs. So the entire leadership team, we first hired the leadership team, and all of us were from very diverse background. In fact, the leader of our business, he was from a naval background. He went to the US, he did some short assignment with Eaton, and then he was sent back to India to lead this project. It was my first job in HR, it was my first job in corporate. And plus all the others, we were like, not everyone was from the automotive industry. So we didn't have any biases behind us that this is how the plant needs to be set up. This is how the employees need to be hired. This is from where we should hire the employees. No, we had a white slate in front of us. We had the vision we wanted to achieve, and we didn't care about any industry practices or this works. I mean, we just came up with very unique ideas, and it's almost been, 13 years now, and the plant is doing excellent. That plant is a world-class manufacturing plant now, and it appears as if it's my baby. I'm so proud of the achievements of that business. And they have, still we have employees whom we hired 13 years ago. They are still continuing, because they are seeing growth in that business, right? So that's one example. And even like all the hiring practices, we didn't hire people all from Pune. We went outside of Maharashtra intentionally to bring in a very diverse workforce. And to your point, Ruchi, as you shared earlier, the example, hiring was only the first piece of it, right? All the other systems, the inclusive practices, everything was in place to ensure that it's not only the diversity, but the inclusion piece is also there. So I just want to share, this one example. Maybe I could share others later.
Sure. Thank you, Devyani. And then leading to this, it's a hiring question back, Lakshmi, to you. I understand, let's say for Devyani's company, in my own experience, hiring, we did have nuances or challenges, but still it was easy to overcome. But what are the challenges you have faced in your experience, Lakshmi, when it comes to hiring a diverse population? And it could be any kind of diversity.
Sure. So, Ruchi, I have generally seen organizations take two approaches when it comes to hiring any form of diversity, right? So one, of course, is a metrics-driven approach, which is very easy. Just set some targets, go after it, and then you keep monitoring it. But then what probably works in the long term is a more integrated approach where every leader, every manager and associate when they realize the goodness of D&I, what a diverse team and an inclusive team does to the business, or to their team, then we have really very converted and committed, hiring managers or hiring leaders. So when leaders drive this behavior and mindset during hiring, and probably in every other talent management program, right? Not just in hiring, because all actions post hiring, right, from onboarding, ensuring the person settles down, the person is engaged, and all of that gives a long-term impetus to the D&I priorities. And then this also has to be boosted by the managers providing a bias-free environment, right? So that is equally important. So what happens when these are on top of leaders' mind? They become atomic habits, right? Like James Clear says in his book. Then it gets imbibed in everybody's DNA. So automatically they start asking questions. Where is my diverse candidates rate? And whatever the dimension is, right? And then you don't have to rely only on metrics. But you spoke about challenges. So one is a lot of patience, lot of awareness, lot of change leadership right from the top. So that is really required. And I keep referring to this as a journey. It is not done overnight, right? So that is one challenge. So there has to be sustained, continuous commitment across the enterprise to make it happen. The second one, of course, I think Suraj and Devyani and also Nikita touched upon is the whole inclusion piece. Because not having an inclusion game plan can cause severe impact to any diversity effect. You will be successful in getting diverse candidates, but then what happens after they leave? If they find that this is not a suitable environment, it's not a good environment for them, where they are nurtured and they're cared for, then that causes a lot more disturbance, and that probably sets the clock back actually, and then you have to do really overtime to come up again on the game plan. So a very balanced diversity and inclusion approach, continuous long-term sustenance, change leadership driven by leaders themselves, and continuously talking about it, right? Because we need to have these uncomfortable conversations as well. So those are some of the things that I would think. There could be others, but then and somebody asked me this question, right? So do you need a diverse candidate or do you need a good candidate? I mean, not in my organization, but in one of the panels. And I said, you don't have to have a neither or. It's not a diversity or, a good candidate. I mean, you just have to think of different ways of doing it, creative ways of doing it, and then you will find what you need, right? So it takes perseverance and patience as well.
Yeah, very true. And, while organizations might have a sustainable agenda, or like you said, where each leader is responsible, it also, poses a lot of anxiety, or, the lack of inclusiveness from the employee side, because even they are trying out new things, or they might not see their alikes in the ecosystem. So it does pose issues around that as well. I mean, the stress to the employees. And leading to this, I think I have a follow-up question, or a extended question to Suraj. In your industry, Suraj, whether it was manufacturing and specifically with aerospace, there is a paucity of talent, or let's say diverse talent, or let's further classify it even from a gender perspective. There is a paucity of that. So there could be some kind of a gender bias in that industry. So what are you really doing to create a talent pool for your industry or your organization?
Thanks for the question. If I were to tell you that gender bias does not exist in our industry, I think I would be lying. And of course, the strange part about this aspect of biasness is most of the time the people themselves do not know that within them, somewhere deep within, exists this biasness. And when you ask them this question, they would come back and say, no, we don't have any biases on any area. So you take me back to my journey about 5 years ago. So how did we start? We went about working on the same, and we used whatever help we got, internal, external, experts in the industry, and like Lakshmi said, it's a journey. And the first step for us was educating the manager and the employees about this whole aspect. employees so that they could question the managers, and the managers because they would be mostly taking decisions on anything and everything. Then we made an action plan to ensure that we can remove this unconscious bias. And of course, I don't have to go into details. There are various methods, systems, trainers. Nikita talked about apps and whatnot already there today, but a very few existed 5 years back. Then the most important is the commitment from the managers. I'm not talking about targets. Sometimes we get confused between commitment of the managers as X% of hiring, and in this case, since you've asked me the question on gender diversity, X number of targets. No, it was not that. It was a commitment that they would be open and conscious when they are taking decisions in all areas, not only in hiring, but in all areas. And since we already had the culture of speak up and no retaliation, which is kind of one of our values in our DNA, it helped us bring in this commitment from the managers. And then the best part is we made it a business objective. And when we made it a big business objective, the shift happened from HR not owning it to business starting owning this objective. We had business champions in different functions and departments and divisions, and they got together. They formed a network. They got together, and that's where we saw traction happening. And the best part is after that, as a consequence of that, the entire diverse population itself started speaking for you. They spoke about what happens within the organization, encouraging other diverse candidates to join internally and externally. So they kind of became, like magnets for us. And once you have this in place, we saw the pull from business. Now, what happens is if we don't give a recruitment slate, which is 50-50, which basically means the final shortlist of candidates, if there is not 50% men and 50% women, we get pulled up in HR. Why is that? Please justify by business. The entire network, like I was talking about, of the business champions is not run by HR. It runs on its own, fueled as an additional support system to the organization. And when they come up with suggestions and ideas, they directly present to the leadership team. And even to look at very simple aspects of systems and processes. Now, once you've got this, once you've got the diversity, numbers in, when people are coming in, then you also have to look at all your systems and processes. And definitely it has to change to reflect the diversity mix within your organization or the culture that you want to bring about. And because of all these things, we've seen great results. In the past 5 years, I can proudly say our gender diversity percentages went from 12 to 24%. And, the good part about this is if you continue doing the same thing again and again with different sets of people, which I call the diversity people, and then you expect different results, it's not going to happen. You're fooling yourself and others, and you're wasting resources of the company. You have to change the internal ways of working when you want to increase and push for this diversity. So that's how we went about the journey in the last 5 years.
Great to hear that, Suraj. And I'm sure in the process you have given the industry, the candidates or the employees which weren't existing, let's say 4 or 5 years back, the whole process. We have a lot of millennials and Gen Z, as we call them, on this call across India. And I wanted to ask you, Suraj, what are some of the changing trends that you see in this generation, millennials, Gen Z? In our ecosystem, we would have all of them together now. Their supervisors could be millennials or the generation Y, and then their leaders could be Gen X. So, we are now seeing all the different generations together. So typically for the millennials and Gen Z, do you see any changing trends?
Oh, definitely. If I look at moving forward, the the whole concept and idea about IND itself is going to undergo a paradigm shift with the males joining the workforce. No doubt, this is a key aspect for them when they are choosing where to work. They do look at is the organization respecting diversity? Is there inclusiveness there? But not because of diversities in terms of age, gender, race, physical ability, but it's more cognitive. Nikita talked a little bit about that. In the sense, cognitive in the sense of ideas and thoughts. Is there diversity in ideas and thoughts and perspectives? And if I have a different idea or a thought or a perspective, will that be acceptable? So you see where it is moving from: diversity in terms of what we look at today versus diversity in terms of thought and perspective, whether that is acceptable or not. And 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 for them, it is about a mix of experiences. Why do they look at diversity? It's for them a mix of experiences, identity, ideas, opinions, versus integrating people with different diversity. So that's what is going to change. And now the acid test always remains the same, and it is the culture. And males do not have the patience to continue to work in a non-inclusive culture. And you have to do your homework, nemawashi, prepare the ground. It starts with cultural sensitization and inclusiveness, and diversity will count for zero for them if they do not feel included in the existing culture of the company. And like most, they will not have the patience to stay back, but they will move on.
Yeah.
That's my thoughts on the male generation.
We're talking about the Maggie 2-minute generation, right? They would want everything instantly.
Absolutely.
Devyani and Lakshmi, your thoughts on it. Do you see any different kind of trends with the millennials and Gen Z?
Yeah, I can add, unless Devyani, you want to go first?
No, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I think Suraj put it very nicely, but the way I would probably see it, and there's a lot of research out there, right? So one way is to categorize people based on the year of birth, which is perfectly okay, millennials, Gen Z, baby boomers. But then I think we need to take it a step ahead, and that's where we call them the archetypes, right? So there are a lot of nuances. So the whole concept of intersectionality, right, is really gaining a lot of ground these days. I'm not generally talking about multi-generational, but any dimension of diversity. You have multiple aspects of diversity rolled into one person, right? And there's a lot of research, and whoever is interested can go and look it up. So it will be difficult to see the person as belonging to one dimension alone. And let me take an example. So I could be from a particular gender orientation. I could be from a particular rural or urban part of India. I could have so many years of experience, my tenure, my diverse background, my marital status, so many things, right? And when what research says is when you are intentionally including one dimension in a person, and that includes the cognitive diversity I was mentioning in terms of the thinking and learning styles, you are unintentionally excluding some other dimensions. So it will be grossly unfair to sort of broad brush everybody with the same paintbrush. These are the stereotypes. This is what, and I think we need to break that first and foremost if we need to build an inclusive culture. The ability of the manager to see the associate as they would like to be treated, right, is very important. And having specific interventions very specifically on the multi-gen, because you asked the question, having courageous conversations, getting the managers and associates together, and we encourage a lot of that in our organization because we do have a significant intake of graduates as well. So that really helps foster an inclusive environment. It's not for us to say the organization alone is responsible or the candidates alone are responsible. I think they need to join hands and work on it together.
Yeah. Devyani, your thoughts on the same?
Sure. I kind of agree both with what Suraj and Lakshmi mentioned, and just to take it forward, right? So let's see what's happening around us. So I think we have many options available in the market, right? And imagine a Gen Z coming to the workplace. The kind of, for example, the kind of role models that person would have seen, right? So, like, say, I'm a Gen X. So, in my times when we had movies, then mothers were kind of projected a certain way. Women were projected a certain way. The father was projected a certain way. But I have two daughters, right? I mean, their upbringing is in a totally different environment. So, today morning, I told you, Ruchi, I had a long session. It was a 5-hour session. My daughters were there in their class. My husband made breakfast. Gender stereotypes like you have to do this or you have to do that. And I'm imagining, like, I interact with many youngsters in my organization. Most of them will come with the same expectation. Especially if we talk about women, I see less and less Gen Zs will ask for preferential treatment. I mean, they want to be treated the same. In fact, I've had some women employees come and tell me, I don't want this role if it's only for women. I decline this opportunity. I'm as good as my male colleagues. Treat me at par. Right? I mean, if there is a general gossip going on that, I mean, this is a gender-specific opportunity, I've had people declining it. So, and we have multiple options on food, multiple options on dresses. So people want to try everything. And I think to earlier Suraj's point, when they come to the workplace, they want a similar environment. I mean, they don't want to be boxed in a certain category, one. Secondly, they want enrichment in terms of diverse experience. In fact, all of our CSR initiatives, we have more and more millennials participating because job enrichment, job satisfaction is more important to them. So I also agree we are undergoing a paradigm shift. And the way we are designing our I&D programs, these initiatives, we have to be more mindful of what is the market out there from where we are hiring people, how is their entire thought process changing. I'm not sure. I know I had many thoughts around that, but hope I was able to make some sense.
No, absolutely. I mean, all of you are speaking, the same thing. More and more equality, more and more options are available. So the ability to challenge, the ability to try out different experiences within the same organization, less patience. So the organizations, the manager, the culture, all have to also transform themselves to really accommodate that, and not only just accommodate to fit, like we say, to culturally fit, but to add on, to the culture and the experiences of the millennials. So totally agree. And again, this question is for all three of you. You can go in any sequence, or otherwise, Devyani, we can start with you once again. But let us hear some examples, from your company, what you have really done to, set up this culture of diversity, inclusion, and growth.
Right. Okay. So thanks for asking that. So in fact, as I said, in Eaton, we call this inclusion and diversity. And we believe the tone is set at the top. So we have a very clear I&D strategy where it's led by our senior leadership team, our global SLT. So it's called the GIC, the Global Inclusion Council. Then in all the regions, so again, Eaton has 90,000 employees spread across the globe. So we have these regional headquarters where we have the RICs, the Regional Inclusion Councils. So Global Inclusion Council will roll out some high-level global policy. But as you understand, inclusion and diversity also means different things in different regions. So the RICs in the regions drive the regional practices. Then it's not only about the leaders at the top, right? So we also have the managers. The managers also, it's a part of the Eaton leadership model. What's the expectation from the manager on I&D behaviors and driving the culture? And then we also hold each and every employee accountable for I&D. So in Eaton, we have these multiple IERGs, that's Inclusion Employee Resource Groups. And based on the employee's own passion, they can go and join these groups. Like we have the WAVE, Women Adding Value at Eaton. So that's around setting the right processes which promotes women-related hiring, promotions, retention strategy. We have groups for millennials. And it's not that the WAVE is only for women. We have many of our male colleagues who participate in WAVE. In Engage, which is for millennials, we also have employees from my generation, going and joining it, right? And then we have similar groups for veterans, people who join from the forces. So we have multiple groups where each and every employee is expected to join at least one IERG. So I just shared the high level structure. So it's ingrained, as you all said, in the DNA of this organization.
Yeah. Which makes it sustainable as
right.
All discussing. Lakshmi, anything from your side on, we were discussing and you did mention that, you are, it's a journey and you're doing a lot of stuff on that. So would you like to share?
So it's interesting. I was listening to what Devyani was saying. It's not really different. I think tiered, multi-pronged approach is what is required, right? And that involves the entire organization, not just one population or one group of HR or leaders or the central D&I team. I think it's everybody needs to come together. So from an associate standpoint, we do have self-empowered groups. We call them employee resource groups, and they are around multiple dimensions of diversity. They do have well-formed charter, a very passionate, enthusiastic group of folks who come together, run programmatic solutions. At the same time, they are also allies. So two things we do at an associate level. So one is the whole concept of allyship, because I think that's probably misunderstood also. And probably it's an evolving trend. When I say that, I mean anybody who raises a hand cannot be called an ally, right? And I'll tell you why. So sometimes we need to stand up for what we believe in, even understanding the nuances of dimensions of diversity. And this is what these ERGs, the employee resource groups, actually do. They create those awareness and they create those allies. So it is like a ripple effect, right? So it really gets cascaded across the organization. The second thing is we lean a lot on a concept called simple start. And I spoke about these small atomic habits. It may not be a large intervention. It may not be a large event. Those are very good. But then from an employee standpoint, what is that one small difference I can do to create an inclusive environment is the thought we seed with every associate. Yeah, we will do all these at an enterprise level. Leaders will do it. But from an associate standpoint, they can either be an ally or they, for instance, I'll give you one example, right? So we propagate a lot about changing the diet, and that has nothing to do with carbs or proteins. It is about how you go to different sources of information. There is a lot of psychological research as well that says, don't go to your supporters alone, go to your naysayers, because you will get that critical angle of the whole, spiel to your, pitch, right? And many times we go to people who think very like us. So how do you intentionally move people to go to a diverse set of information? Go read a completely different author, right? Or go talk to somebody who does not think like you, has a very different lived experience. Maybe choose a mentor who's so different from you, because then it also removes the similar to me kind of biases, and we're not creating similar type of people in the organization. So these are two things that we do, a simple starts where every associate can participate and create an inclusive culture in their own fashion. And then the second one is, of course, employee resource groups. But otherwise, we do have systematic solutions at a leader level, at manager level. Managers are a community we cannot ignore, right? So they say sometimes leaders get it, associates get it, and the train really meets at the manager's end, right? So it is a conversation, a hard conversation for leaders, for HR, for D&I teams to say, how can we empower managers, equip managers to be more inclusive? So these are some things, but I was just surprised at the amount of similarity that Devyani shared in what we are doing as well. So thanks, Devyani, for sharing that.
And very interesting, Lakshmi. I've made a note of these things, atomic habits, changing their diet. It's really working at a physical, mental level, psychological level, you know. So thanks for sharing that. Suraj, what are your thoughts on the same? What is your
I think absolutely I echo what I hear from my colleagues on the panel. The way we go about is also very similar. And I think if you have the basic DNA of inclusion and diversity in your organization, it will be these things. But I think one needs to be sensitive and ready to change if things and situations do demand and you see the opportunity arise. I will not talk about diversity champions in business and how they roll up. I will not talk about the councils. I will not talk about the Fly Again program, which is basically a returnee program that we have. We've tweaked it a little, made it much more user friendly. But I'll talk about two things. One is things as sometimes things which are simple and easy have a lot of impact. And I believe when we are talking about inclusion and diversity, we are talking about everyone. Even if one person feels left out, not included, I think we've not succeeded in the overall scheme of things. So what we've got within our organization is something called an inclusiveness tree. And it's a physical tree, not a real tree. It's a physical tree which has got hooks in it, and you've got green and brown leaves that are there. And what you can do is, if you feel inclusive, you put a green leaf on the tree. And if you don't, you put a brown leaf, and there's a small chit that you can fill up and write the reason why without your name, drop it into a box. And that's what the diversity champions collect and see if it's a systemic problem, if it's a policy problem, if it's that individual, and try to solve each and every one of these problems. The second thing, earlier in our journey, when I was talking about the 5 years, we started with a Women India network. But slowly now we've matured to a level where we have balance for business groups. And this balance for business group is a diverse group. And the aim of this group is focused on diverse employees, how to bring in inclusion and diversity with the focus of how we can make business better. And end of the day, that's what the focus of the organization should be. And these organizations have brought about great results. Things that Nikita talked about, things that we've talked about, how to bring in gender neutral. We went even to the extent of looking at our magazines and the articles that we publish, the newspaper articles of what tone does that give? Job ads, putting women in when we are looking at diversity hires and things like that. And also these two things, inclusiveness tree, which is a simple idea, can be cut and paste anywhere, and the balance for business groups that we have is two unique things that we've started.
Thank you. And with this, we come to our last question. We have 2 minutes left, but I think the audience would be very keen to understand that. So far, we've spoken about what we are doing from the organization perspective, from our leaders' perspective and managers' perspective. Let's hear it from you. What would be your message to the audience, to our people, who are hearing us? What can young professionals from diverse backgrounds, and I'm talking about all kinds of diversity again, really do to grow in an organization?
Let me start and take this question up, because I'm just going to echo how Devyani started her whole conversation. And my advice would be, focus on being the best at what you do and continue to skill yourself, de-skill, upskill, reskill yourself, and join an organization that values the difference that you bring to the organization. And just don't join an organization because they are hiring you for your diversity quotient. If you do that, in the long run, it never works out. That's my message to the males in this audience today.
Sure. If I may just add, I completely echo what Suraj said. And then I want to say, for all the diverse and all the groups there, always think, yes, there is a glass ceiling. But where is the glass ceiling? To Suraj's point, it's between your 2 ears. Here is your glass ceiling. So you have to break it. I mean, there is nobody. So you heard the organizations are doing so many things to make each one of us successful. Now it's up to us how we go and leverage all that and be successful, right? So, I mean, there is the sky is the limit. We have double amputees, both the legs amputated, they climb Mount Everest, right? There is, I mean, no barriers, it's all in your mind. So that's what I would add to what Suraj said.
That was beautiful. Let me also add here, right? So the most fascinating aspect that I think of the human race is that beyond our similarities, we are very different in our unique ways, right? So how do we appreciate the differences, celebrate the uniqueness? How are we being able to be a true ally, right? And believe that we can make a difference. So lean in, make a difference, be an ally. So that is my message. Thank you.
Thank you. And with this, we come to an end of our panel discussion. It says, we say that, right? Time flies when you are having fun. So I really, really enjoyed the session. And I am very, very sure all the people out there, they have taken away a lot of messages, from this very engaging conversation. So on behalf of the organization, Monster, Quess, I'd like to thank all of you, Suraj, Lakshmi, Devyani, for taking out time from your busy schedule that late in the evening, and still having that passion and so much of enthusiasm over this topic, and engaging our audience. So thank you very much once again.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us over.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Over to you, Vidya.
Thank you, Ruchi, and thank you to all the panelists who've joined us today. And that was indeed, a lot of diverse thoughts on, this very topic of diversity. And I particularly love the idea about this green leaf and the brown leaf tree. That is something, a really non-intrusive way of finding out from people whether they feel included or not. Maybe Suraj, if you're okay, someday we would like to, get inspired by that idea, I would say. Thank you. Thanks for joining us today. And talking about, diverse, various views on diversity, we have the next topic that we're looking at is again a very different take on this whole concept of diversity. Now, what we often, do is we have policies in organizations or departments in organizations focusing on diversity and inclusion. However, this may not necessarily, change the mindset of the people or the community. However, if we were to flip this, being able to create awareness and actually change the mindset of people in an organization will probably help us in shaping further policies and God knows, maybe eventually the society or our country. So this next topic that we're going to talk about is on the LGBTQ community, the inclusion at workplace. What are the rights and laws that one can, expect? And to talk about this topic, we have with us here today, Suresh Ramdas. I'm very happy to welcome Suresh to this event. And a very quick introduction of Suresh before we move ahead. Suresh has over 16 years of corporate experience in customer support and DEI, along with being a motivational speaker, a facilitator, and an LGBTQ plus spokesperson for inclusion in the corporate space. Suresh is a certified diversity professional and also an NLP practitioner. And he has co-facilitated a leadership program called Leading with Pride, or LWP. Now, Suresh is also a member of the Rainbow Toastmasters Club, which is the world's first LGBTQA plus allies virtual club. And that's quite interesting to know. And he is the winner of Mr. Gay India 2019. And he has been featured in the outstanding 100 LGBT plus future leaders list for 2 consecutive years, that is 2019 and 2020. And he was ranked 25th in the 2020 list. Now, with this passion of wanting to give back to the community, Suresh works for trans inclusion in the corporate space, spreading awareness about queer issues, mental health issues in the LGBTQ community, and HIV and drug abuse. So, Suresh, we're really happy to have you with us today. And I'd like to hand over the stage, so to say, to you. Thank you, Suresh, for joining us.
All right. Great. Thank you so much, Vidya. Thank you so much, Monster team and Quess, to reach out to me and have this conversation. Really, really happy. I know everybody's just gone through Pride Month. So I hope you all have a little bit of understanding of what exactly it's all about. But I believe that this is the first time that the team has really put up something for awareness around the LGBTQ plus community. So I'm super excited. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and let me know if you all can see my screen.
Yes, Suresh. Okay,
perfect. All right. So like I said, thanks for the introduction. And yes, my name is Suresh Ramdas. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And that's how I'd like to be addressed. And we will just get into a little bit of a conversation, but also something very insightful, because it's the first time that you all are, getting to hear about LGBTQ plus community, or this session is happening. So I just put together some slides on what is it about the community, why do we really need to talk about the community, and get a little understanding, from a workplace perspective. But before that, I'd like to go ahead and start off with this quote, which I truly, truly follow and I believe in, by Harvey Milk, which says, "Hope will never be silent." Right? I have a hope for a beautiful planet where everybody is included, everybody's accepted for who they are, be it with human beings, animals, and aliens as well. So if there is something like that to really happen. So with that hope, I want to go ahead and get into the basics, right? Now, it is very important for you all to understand that when it comes, or when we talk about LGBTQ plus community, we definitely need to go ahead and talk about sex and gender, right? It's very important because a lot of them have ideas and not complete information. So I'm going to walk you all through a quick sort of crash course on about the community, who we are, and some background, because then you all could really understand what is the need for us to be really out there, and why do we really need to talk about LGBTQ plus community people at workplace. All right, so with going that further, let's talk about sex and gender. Like I said, what is sex? Sex is nothing but the biological attributes of human beings and animals, which includes physical features, chromosomes, your hormones, anatomy, how really you look like. All of that is really considered to be sex. The interesting part is gender, which is, again, like it says, it's a social construct of roles, behaviors, mannerisms, expressions, identities. And by and large, they have been very, very binary, right? Which is very much like, how should be a female behave? How should a male behave? How are women supposed to, talk? How are men supposed to, explain things or express themselves? All of that is very, very society driven, or a social construct. So with that basic understanding of sex and gender, I just want to quickly walk you all through what are the other things that really goes in, right? One is on the left-hand side that you see is the identity, which is called gender identity. Who as an individual do you really believe who you are? That is you. As an individual, that is your identity, right? So it could be anything. Whoever you think you are is based on what you really think. So that is your gender identity. The way you really want to express yourself to either yourself and the outside world is the gender expression. Now, it may not be as per the society construct or rules, but then you as an individual, how do you want to express yourself? And then you have your attraction, right? Which is very important. It can be physical, it can be emotional as well. And lastly, like I said, it is the sex where, it's a physical anatomy and your chromosomes, genes, all of that construct put together. Now, this is very interesting for you all to have an understanding, which is called the gender-bred person, which again tells you all the basics. I know, again, like I go back, it's always binary that is being taught, men, women, nothing beyond that. But it is really not that. Why? Because we all are in a spectrum. There is nothing called you are 100% man and 100% woman. There is no spectrum in between, right? You cannot really define who is a man and who is a woman. Again, if you look at it from a sex or your organs perspective, yes, you do have. There is a little bit of an understanding, which is the intersex community as well. But everything else is a spectrum, right? You have your gender identity where you have, as womanness and manness, where it talks about your hobbies, your likes, like boys cannot play with Barbie dolls while girls should not play with cars and, weapons or guns and all of that. Why? Because it's very gendered. Expression also is the same. You have to be very manly. Women, cross your legs, don't spread your legs and sit, while men can do that. Your mannerisms can be very aggressive for men. It's okay to misbehave, or it's okay to go ahead and say certain things, while a woman cannot do that. Again, based on social construct, right? But then it is a spectrum. You can't really say things like, you have to behave this way. It is a spectrum. So let's get that understanding. And then anatomical sex, again, like I said, some women have facial hair, while some men have, very soft voice. Some men don't have any facial hair, right? So again, it is based on how you are really put together by nature. So it's all natural. And lastly, sex assigned at birth, right? So by default, we know male and female, but there is another community as well called the intersex community, where 1 in every 1,000 people or kids that are born are from the intersex community. So you do the math as per your current global population. But people go ahead and decide. People, in a sense, the doctors and the parents decide what the sex of the kid should be if the doctor identifies the kid to be an intersex kid, which is not the right thing. That you cannot decide just because it's your baby. The baby has to decide again. So that's why in Tamil Nadu, intersex operations are not allowed. It's banned by the government. Let them come to age, because again, a lot of intersex kids you cannot see the physical aspect where, intersex kids have both, organs of male and female, and it doesn't happen that way. For some it does, for some it doesn't. So when they hit puberty is when you would really get to know what's happening within your body. And when, as a doctor or as a parent, you take a call on that, when they hit puberty, there's a lot of things happening in between or within the body. And that's when a lot of confusion happens. Now, I'm for sure everybody must be thinking, oh my God, so are intersex kids transgender kids? Or are intersex people same as transgender? No, trans people or transgender community people, and never use the term a transgender. Let's go ahead and start correcting and making use of the right language. Transgender community people, trans people, or you can go a little more specific as trans women, trans men. So trans means transitioning from male to female or female to male. So trans women are men, sex assigned at birth as male, and then they transition to be a female. A trans men, sex assigned at birth as female, and they transition to be a male, right? Now, you can talk about transitioning a little bit more because of the fact that it is not really completely fair in India, with the fact that a lot of, the sex reassignment surgery or the gender affirmation surgery is really not legal, and, pretty much everybody are guinea pigs here. Right? Doctors try and see if it works, it doesn't work. So there are a lot of complications for trans people. And then there's I can go on, but with the benefit of doubt for the time and for the conversation, now let's keep it at that trans people are not the same as intersex people. And bottom line is that your identity is not the same as expression, is not the same as sex, same as gender is not the same as sexual orientation. So let's get that out of our heads. Something for you all to unlearn and something for you all to learn today is about this. Everything is a spectrum. Nothing is binary. Binary is only meant for computer codes. Zeros and ones only for that so that they can do some work. We are human beings. We are in a spectrum. So let's get that out. With that being said, In India, right? We need to come back and focus in India. What is really happening in India? The law, the biggest law, where all the organizations, hid behind, which was Section 377. Majority, I would say, sorry, not all, my bad, not all companies, majority of the companies and organizations, everybody hid behind Section 377 because they didn't want to take the conversation forward. But then it was pretty much about the act. It's about two people of either same sex or all, diverse sex going ahead and having a physical, intimate session within the four walls, which nothing has to do with organizations or corporations. But then still, people hid behind that. Now that it is still there in in various other forms, now that it's there right now, but Section 377 really created a lot of hurdles and a lot of hindrances for us to really have the conversation of inclusion of the LGBTQ plus community people. So I'm going to quickly walk you through the journey of what really happened. Where did this really start off from? So this started off in 1861 with that whole Buggery Act by the Britishers who created that and criminalizing sexual activities against the order of nature. So they decided what is the order of nature, and then everybody else who does not fit as per the so-called society norms or the Britishers' norm at that point in time fell into this category. Go back and revisit your history to understand that India was a very diverse and a very inclusive country for the LGBTQ plus community people. Yes, we did have a lot of other issues like caste and other things, but we were very understanding of people who we are, and they spoke about it in all forms of literature. Yes, the literature was written, but it was never spoken out. It was again very, conscious decision of picking what is required and leaving everything away. A lot of things away, of which LGBTQ community was one of those conversations. Now that we're bringing it on the board and saying that, hey, this is where we were, now a lot of people can get say, oh my God, don't throw too much of that information about LGBTQ or you gay people on us. It was not there, it is too much. It was very much there, but it is just that it was not brought on the front conversation. Now that we all are talking and making sure we want to be inclusive, let's understand the history as well. It is not, quote, I would say that, many people say this is a Western influence, right? Being gay, being lesbian is a Western influence. Now, it is really not a Western influence in one way, but the other way that I look at it is, yes, it is a Western influence brought by the Britishers to India. Before they came, there were transgender community people in the form of Hijras, in the form of Aravanis, in the form of Kotis, which are very much prevalent in the entire Indian state. We did have homosexual activities. We did have lesbians. We did have bisexuals. We did have queer people. If not, one-way ticket to Khajuraho temple will answer all those questions. Right? So it is not a Western influence. Please, again, unlearn that. It is not a Western influence. It is very much there. All our history or ancient, countries, wherever there were, local people, they were very inclusive. They accepted people for who they were. Be it with, the local people in Australia or the Native Americans in the United States. And South America, Africa, entire world. So let's go back to history and understand a little bit. But with that being said, let's go back here. Key focus, right? 1861. Then came in the 1994, where we did have, the petition filed in the Delhi High Court to go ahead and challenge Section 377 because it stalled the conversation on the then HIV and AIDS, spreading that was really happening. It was really not, we were not able to penetrate into that conversation because Section 377 was a barrier. We did have the first Pride Walk, which was in 1999 in Kolkata, called the Kolkata Rainbow Pride. Very, very important and very informative as well, where there were just 7 people who walked that. Fast forward, having said that, there are a lot of things that have happened, but I just, in the interest of time, so we need to go and really see what really happened in the front. So in 2009, the Delhi High Court decriminalized. So a lot of people came out of the closet. Sadly, In 2013, the Supreme Court went ahead and reversed that judgment, saying that no, all you gay people are a minuscule minority. We don't really have the numbers. So sorry, we can't really accept that. Well, people couldn't go back into the closet, and the ones who wanted to be out of the closet went much more deeper into their closets because we were termed as criminals. With that, in 2014, we did have the constitutional rights or recognition given to the transgender community people, which was by far one of the best news in all the while, because we were finally able to give that recognition to the transgender community people. Very important. And then in 2017, it paved path for, fundamental right, which was right to privacy, which helped us in 2018, where the Supreme Court of India went ahead and removed Section 377. Not completely, though, but wherever it is about human beings, right, to individuals with their consent, whoever they are, can engage in a sexual act, right? So that was struck down. Therefore, we are no more called criminals. A lot of work to do still, as you all know. There's a lot of petition going on for a lot of things, but in 2019, the government came back with the Transgender Persons Act, which was wanting to be progressive, but is really not progressive if you look at it in many aspects. Where there's a lot of debate happening as to is it the right thing or not, there are still conversations, there's a lot of work to be done, right? But now recently you also have heard that the same-sex marriage conversation is coming up, which was again being deferred to August, one of the dates, I think August 23rd or 24th, because they want to go ahead and get some more information. So we do have a long battle in that aspect. So this has been the whole scenario in India on Section 377 about the LGBTQ plus community people. Now with that history that you all know, what gender, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, India, what's really happening. Also know that there have been a lot of work that has gone in with regarding to being visible, in regards to being vocal. Even with Section 377 being there were a lot of pride marches that were happening across India. And it is so important for us because, again, the Supreme Court called us a minuscule minority. On an average, global estimate says that there is around 10 to 12% of people from the LGBTQ plus community. So again, do the math, right? So with all that information, I know next we're coming into the corporate conversation. Now, why do we need to be inclusive? Why is the need for gay people or lesbian women or bisexual people or trans people really come out and showcase their sexuality in workplace? Why is that? Is that really required? But I just want to go back and tell you all companies with, this is again global statistics about companies with diverse teams have 19% higher revenue, 70% more likely to capture new markets, 1.7 times more likely to be innovation leaders in their markets, and 35% more to outperform industry norms. The reason for talking about this is when you have diverse teams, you have diverse people from various backgrounds, be it with ethnicity, be it with religion, be it with mindset, be it with age, and be it with your sexual orientation and gender identity. You have a diverse team where you can cater to many people. And this is the reasons also for you all to really understand that as an organization, if you all are very diverse, you reap the benefits. Now, very specific, coming back to LGBTQ, I know everybody must be thinking, oh, we need a business case. Why do we need to include them, right? So here is that. 4 topics that I'm going to, walk you all through with regarding to employer of choice. Again, these are a lot of back-end work that has been done on, having conversations with people from the community, with organizations, and really going forward with that. Is that employer choice, productivity and performance, competitive advantage, and reputation and risk. So isn't that what an organization, to an extent, by and large, looks at? They want to be the best. They want to have amazing employees, They want to outperform their competitors, and also at the same time make sure, hey, you know what, we are much better off, without any risks, and we better be good in the market and have a better reputation. So what does that really count for? Employer of choice. Statistics say that 72% of the non-LGBTQ plus people prefer to be in a workplace which is inclusive. 72%. So people really talk about, hey, how is your organization with regarding to your inclusion policies? 87% of people are more likely to accept a job in a company that is LGBTQ plus employee friendly, while 65% of them are looking at diversity policies or HR policies before they go ahead and take a call. So I'm for sure, along with this, there are a lot of other data points also to go ahead for an employer to really look at why they should join this company. But people are looking at it. People are looking at the way you're putting information out there about your organization, be it, be it with the rainbow flag. I know it should not be just a whitewash, which kind of comes in only during June and September, but all throughout. Have those conversations. Are you talking about those specific key pointers out there in your job descriptions, which says that they're inclusive, be it with the language, all of that. People are beginning to really look at all of those. And if you want to be the employer of choice, these are some of the key things that need to be looked into. Then you have productivity and performance. You always want to have amazing productivity and great performing employees. But then if your organization is not inclusive, you can see the kind of performance and productivity that you would get from people who are in the closet. 28% of them lie about their personal life. 25% of people avoid certain people at work as well. 20% avoid special events at work. 20% prefer to stay at home. Yes, I know that this data, the last one is like, hey, everybody's working from home, but this was prior to the pandemic. While 28% of the LGBTQ plus community people are out to their managers, while 25% of them are out to colleagues. Out of all of this, 6 years back, I was one of them who was very much in the closet, not wanting to go ahead and come out because I was very much scared of what my life is going to look like. Is my performance going to be impacted? Is my, going up the ladder, my, job profiles, everything, my promotions, is everything going to be affected for a simple fact that, hey, I like men or I'm a homosexual? Am I going to be judged? Am I going to be really looked down? Am I going to be made a butt of all jokes? I was one of all of these people to go ahead and be as closeted, never spoke about my personal life. And I never wanted to, go into some of these meetings or events where they said, why didn't you come over? Because I was scared. Everybody asked a question, hey, are you single? Are you, do you have a girlfriend? And I had to lie. And everybody says, hey, why don't you get your partner along? That time it was girlfriend. Assumed if you're a boy, get your girlfriend. If you're a girl, get your boyfriend. Well, for me, it was difficult. I did avoid a lot of people at work because there were a lot of homophobic conversations also out there happening. So I'm like, do I need to be there? Are people going to be targeting at me at that point in time? So a lot of things really pan out. And I was one of the 72% where I was not out to my manager before. For 10 years in my organization, I was in the closet because it was my personal journey as well to go through and really come out or figure that out. But one of the key things was also, I was a criminal at that point in time in India. So I was scared if somebody goes and complains about me, what is going to happen to me? And everybody knows we're all scared of the cops and the procedures and process that really goes through until you have your strings to help you out, right? So yeah, so life was not that easy, and you can imagine with all of this at the background, how is your productivity and your performance really going to be great for an individual? A lot of factors to really look into, a little bit, right? Next, competitive advantage clearly states that 71% of the community people are going to purchase from a company or support an organization which is friendly. And we have a $5 trillion global market. a year. We have that spending power, which is again otherwise called the pink money, right? Which I'm for sure you all have heard. If you all haven't, this is a new terminology called pink money, where LGBTQ plus community people have that opportunity, or you all have the opportunity to invest in us so that you all can have these returns at $5 trillion a year. That's a huge amount when you invest in something focused towards the LGBTQ plus community people. Lastly, risk and reputation. This is again a 2016 survey done by the World Bank, talking about India's loss in GDP due to homophobia was $32 billion, or 1.7% of the country's GDP. That's quite a lot for a country, with this population, and this is a huge amount. So think about all of this. This is kind of the business case to say why we need to start really being inclusive of the LGBTQ plus community. Now with that, I know I've given you all the business case, but also I would like to leave you all with some recommendations, right? Important. I'm sure everybody's looking for, hey, what do we do? I know the intent is there to be inclusive of the LGBTQ plus community, and the previous conversation spoke about how can we be inclusive in our, or be diverse in hiring. So we can start looking at it inwards as well, right? Before I get into the recommendations, I just wanted to, because I thought about this, let's not look at hiring people from the LGBTQ plus community people, knowing the fact that 10 to 12% of the community is in your organization. Now, if you haven't created that inclusive environment, then I don't know how that's going to be great to hire people from outside and say, hey, we hired LGBTQ plus people. So start looking inwards and really reflect on, is your organization inclusive enough to go ahead and make sure people are comfortable with who they are. But don't have that criteria or a KPI that how many people are out at work. That's not something that you all should really look at. You all should look at how inclusive is your organization with regarding to various aspects. Because coming out is a personal experience, a personal journey. Yes, for trans community people, that's another story altogether. But then again, don't just put us as a checkbox that you all have done this thing of hiring trans people and leave the rest to everybody else to fend. So let's now look at some of the recommendations. Is that we need to have clear strategy and accountability from the leadership, right? So you'll need to state that in your business goals that yes, we are going to be inclusive of the LGBTQ plus community people as well. I know we speak a lot about gender, and we speak now recently kind of again picking up the conversation of LGBTQ plus people and persons with disability. Look at the intersectionality of all of them as well, right? So that is the next conversation that really needs to go in, and communicate your LGBTQI plus strategy with your key stakeholders and make leaders accountable for, the strategy to be working so that they get implemented as well in your organization. Without accountability, nothing gets, forward. If leaders are not held accountable, then who else is going to be held accountable for that? So when you start from top, then the conversation should really be there. Yes, we are. And do walk the talk. Though it may take time. We're not expecting that, okay, since you've had a session today, great, tomorrow onwards, your company or organization changes. No, it is a culture shift as well. Can we start working on that? It takes time, but are we doing the right things? So strategy, leadership, and accountability, 1 point. Second one is around policy, guidelines, and benefits, right? Can you start reviewing your policies and practices to make sure they are best in class? Or is that the right policy in place? Are they gender neutral? Are you using the right language? Make sure that you'll have clear opportunity and anti-discrimination policies out there. Very important. And you need to call them out. Just not having it somewhere and sending out an email, which is like, a small, minute thing. No, you'll need to talk about that to your employees. Make them aware that these are the policies available. Now, again, you'll need to have a process and a policy around how you're going to handle cases, right? Because again, a lot of them are not really aware about the LGBTQ plus community and who they are and, you know, how to really handle them. So can we have people in place, you know, get people from outside, make sure that you'll, you know, have the right set of team to go ahead and do the right things when such issues come up with regarding to harassment or bullying or even discrimination. Introduce workplace transition guidelines for transgender employees as well. Very important. Now, by default, like I said, in India, transitioning is not happening properly, and there are a lot of consequences because of which they have lifelong issues. Now, can we make their lives better? Are we doing the right thing for them? Right. So you need to have those policy guidelines and transition guidelines as well in your benefits. Moving on, corporate, cultural, and training. Very important, right? Because the fact that the more you really talk about it, the more conversations are happening, the more walk the talk is happening, it creates that awareness. So you need to really talk about, you know, communications where you all are saying that, hey, we are, you know, wanting to be in LGBTQ plus inclusive organization. We are doing the right steps. We are, you know, trying to, you know, build awareness around the community. So create that space of communication out there. Be proactive, be it with your Pride months, and not only Pride months, but all the other months as well. Can you look at intersectionality conversations when you're doing women, you know, Women's Day celebrations? Can you go ahead and include trans people, lesbian women as well out there, and bring in those representations? Men's Day, bring in trans men if you have in your organization. Bring in those representations out there. You know, gay people, bisexual men, gay men. Bring those sort of representations so that you can really, you know, tell people that, hey, you know, there are other people also, not just, you know, single parents or, you know, parents with kids. Think about all of that. Even persons with disability, they also come in that spectrum. Right? So think about all of these things and how can you all really include that. Develop an ally campaign. We need to be allies, like how we want men to ally for women as gender. Like we also want to be, you know, for persons with disability, we want all the able-bodied people to be allies for persons with disability. So we need the cisgendered heterosexual people to become allies for the LGBTQ plus community people. So how can we bring up that campaign? There are a lot of people in your organization wanting to do something for the LGBTQ plus community, but they really don't know because that conversation is not happening in the organization. And then, you know, again, with consent, please ask for the role models of people who are out in your organizations, and do they want to take up that role of wanting to be role models and really, you know, use them for, you know, bringing more awareness in your organization. That really helps. You know, somebody from within the organization would have a much better impact rather than getting somebody from outside. So that's what I'm saying. Start looking at, you know, having inclusive conversations within the organizations, and don't really have to hire people from outside because you have people within the organization itself. And lastly, hold an annual LGBT or a diversity event, you know, just to celebrate. Yes, June is there. Even September, please think about it. June is Global Pride Month. September is India Pride Month. This is something that I've been also vocally talking about. Why don't we have a Pride Month which has a lot of history about India? June is very US centric because it started in Stonewall. It started in the United States of America. But yes, we do celebrate. We want that, you know, representation. We want that awareness. But if you want to talk about India, September is the time. Because September 6, 2018 was when the judgment by Supreme Court of India to remove Section 377. That was a landmark moment for us. So why don't we celebrate that? Because during that celebration, you will get to understand India and the history of how inclusive we were and what are the things that we really fought about. So think about that. That could be a part of your cultural training and awareness programs. Lastly, when you talk about, I know people have spoken about ERGs and you know, how do we get there? Now, can we bring in or assign people for that ERG, give them responsibilities, give them the position as well to go ahead and lead conversations around LGBTQ plus community people? Very important. Can we establish and support, like I said, an ERG that is inclusive, with having both employees from the community and allies as well. Appoint executive sponsors and review and analyze the LGBTQ workforce data that you collect so that you can examine workplace culture and D&I strategy. Sorry, I know I did go overboard with this, and I just quickly wanted to share that with that whole process that you all have learned today, you all are somewhere in this whole allyship spectrum as well. Not just LGBTQ plus community people are on the spectrum, but you all as allies are also in the spectrum. Some people could be in one extreme who really don't know what to do, while you have the other extreme, but people are just taking out and wanting to do the right thing. And many people like who are attending today are probably starting the journey or probably somewhere in between the journey. That's absolutely fine and absolutely okay. All right. So with that, I would like to leave you all with a final note saying that if being gay is a choice, then when did you decide to become straight? With that, thank you so much, everybody, for patiently listening. And I do apologize for going overboard by 10 minutes, but I hope it was a good session for you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Suresh. That was indeed quite interesting. And I would say the extra 10 minutes spent was actually quite worth the while. And I was thinking, it's one thing, reading about, the LGBTQ community or watching the news, etc. And yeah, it's another thing actually speaking to someone from the community. And thank you for sharing your views so openly and candidly. For me, it's indeed been a very, an eye-opener of a session. And we do hope to have you over at Monster, at Quess Corp, for us to, make sure that our employees are more aware. And one thing that particularly stood out for me, Suresh, is where you said, don't go looking at hiring a certain number of people from the LGBTQ community, but see if you can get people to open up within. I think that's really kind of stayed on my mind. And I take care of diversity initiatives at Quess, and I'm going to keep this in mind when I plan any initiatives going forward. So we usually think about hiring from outside and increasing numbers, but I think I'm going to change my my style of working from here on. And thank you so much for joining us, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of Monster and Quess Corp. And you have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, so to all our audience watching us out there, we have another 2 more days of Conc-live, and these next 2 days are also going to be packed with a lot of informative and useful and relevant information. So do stay on, do watch, and in case you've missed these sessions, you can always go back and look for the event Conc-live, monster.com on YouTube and watch. Thank you, and you all have a good evening. Bye-bye.